Stacey, with your insistence on kind of audience and readership, thinking about that, it loops back to John's first comment about thinking about like who you're citing. And, I got a paperback, it was even just, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the reviewers just said, who you cite matters. And I always repeat that to myself now when I'm working on things, just as kind of this mantra as far as it does, who you cite matters. You need to be engaged in that scholarship and well-read, because it does matter for a lot of reasons that we don't have to, discuss them all, but who you cite matters, right? And I think that goes back to understanding the journal, understanding the audience.
I want to have that conversation. Let me ask that as a question. Does it matter who I cite in the paper I write?
Yes, 100%. I think for me, at least understanding this, and it starts as understanding maybe you are developing as a graduate student and later on into your career, but that like oftentimes when you're reading things, it might be the second, third, fourth time, fifth time it's been reiterated, recrafted, repositioned. And so it's important to understand the foundation of that scholarship, I think. And maybe, it doesn't necessarily have to be directly who you're citing, but you need to understand where that scholarship and those ideas, that thought process is coming from, that theoretical narrative, whatever it is, you need to understand the foundation. I think that's really important. And that's what grad school is preparing you to do in large part. But yeah, that's one reason. I think also there are a lot of conversations about some individuals, some specific groups who are often or more commonly left out of citations, right? I think that's also something really important to keep in mind. Actually, really recently as an editor, working as an editor myself, I had a rather uncomfortable conversation with 2 contributors, and one felt slighted by not being included as in the citation, and instead of the footnote, right? We talk about this footnote type of condition, but she felt really slighted as a Latina woman not being included and not being cited, right? And there are many, I think that's also something to keep in mind. Who are you citing and why are there some people are there, whether you're conscious of it or not, who are not being included in that Works Cited.
Have you heard the expression that a budget document is a moral document? That your household budget or your organizational budget is an indication of your morals. It's a moral document. It determines how your organization is spending its resources, what it values, where it's giving attention. And so when you create a budget, you're not just deciding how the money is going to get spent, you're deciding how you're going to publicly live out the values of your organization. So my academic publishing equivalent of that is a references list, or a works cited list is a moral document. It's not just about accurately engaging the mainstream conversation or the academic conversation heretofore. It's also about making sure that people who have been underrepresented but have been significant contributors to the conversation are highlighted in my work. I am a white woman in a field that deals with, interdisciplinarity and interculturality and multiple communities that I'm not a part of. And so I feel maybe even an additional responsibility to highlight people who are doing the work with less representation and less acknowledgement of that work, and to be intentional with my works cited or with my references list, that I don't just send that off when I feel like the part I crafted, my words are perfect, my article is perfect. I give my reference list a once over to make sure that as sort of the budget document of my paper, that it accurately represents my values as an author. And I don't think that's a required step by any means, but if you are doing critical work, it's something that you'll definitely want to be aware of before you send your work into the world. So I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, this point is one where Stacey and I disagree.
I'm sorry, everyone
it relates to one where you and I disagree on something that's very important to you, I think, which is that publishing is a conversation. When I have a conversation, I talk to 1 or 2 people. When I write an article, I cite 30 people. But it's something that I do because we have two warring ideals. With the first of which is to succeed in academia. Academia is a medieval institution with an Enlightenment veneer. That's what a university is. So you have authoritarian people that are in control of an institution that is supposed to be enlightened and democratic. So you have the greats. And in previous centuries, that would be normal. In the 19th century, you would have the authority that you have to cite. You continue to have to cite that authority or you will be rejected. So if there is a person that is the greatest in your field, especially if they are living, then you need to cite that person, because that's a probable person that might be rejecting, that might reject your article, or that or as an acolyte of that person. These people have grad students. So there are very powerful people in our field because our institutions are hierarchical institutions. I have advanced to a different level as an associate professor than I was as an assistant professor. So I've moved up one rung in the hierarchy. There are people that are very, very high in the hierarchy and they have a lot of power. Naturally, like most hierarchies, if not all of them, this is incredibly unfair. And so you have this silent reality that we all deal with, and then you have a reality that people are working to change. And so that's something you can put on a t-shirt like Cite Black Women. So you need to ask yourself about your values, just like Stacey says, because this is not a natural conversation by any means. This is a conversation where you have to talk to the right people and you have to ask yourself, well, who are the right people?
I can live with that assessment. I'm going to give you a little example. In an edited volume that I'm working on right now, there were several people in the volume who wanted to cite someone who was sort of, a powerful person in my little discipline. And in one of my comments to my co-editor, I wrote something like, I will die before we cite this person in this volume. Because this particular person, by way of sort of a snowball effect of power and position, did something very small 40 years ago and has accumulated power on that thing ever since. While lots of people have critiqued and improved that model over time, but the people who are critiquing and improving the model aren't actually accumulating the power. The person who had that original incomplete thought 40 years ago is accumulating the power. And so as an editor of the volume, I have the ability to say, this volume is not going to cite the powerful. This volume is going to cite the many, many contributors who have gone overlooked. And as an editor, I can also say, this was the original incomplete thought, but have you read this paper where they critique and expand it? Have you read this paper where they critique and expand it? And so I can help my authors craft an argument that's more inclusive. So I think there's different situations where different amounts where citations might equal different things. But I think it's a really good point to mention that sometimes you got to cite who you got to cite to get your foot in the door. It's the reality of the field and the power structure we live in.